last year we played a little game called The Biggest Blind Spots we had, right? The biggest movie blind spots. And this week we've gone and watched one. We've gone and watched a big one that's nearly 50 years old. I'd never seen it. I think you'd seen it once.
I'd seen it, I think I said at a sleepover through my eyes like that when I was really young.
Well, as you can tell through that, it is a horror film. We have gone and finally watched The Exorcist. 1973, William Friedkin's very famous, culture-defining horror film. Mark Kermode famously calls it his favorite film of all time.
It's also like the scary film.
Yeah.
Is that wrong to say? It's like the scary film if you were to say like what is the scariest film of all time?
Right, yeah, exactly. The Exorcist. So we've both watched it this week at different times. James took the very strange decision to watch it this morning.
I watched it this morning. I'd run out of time. I'd seen Belfast. And I was like, I really need to see The Exorcist. I was meant to do it last night. Ended up going out for a late dinner last night, and I wanted to watch it, but I was tired. So I was like, oh, it's fine. If I get up, George's coming at 10. If I get up at 8, I can just get this film out. Which I know, not perfect conditions to watch it, but still, I felt like I needed to have a lie down afterwards, which we can get into, but that film doesn't rest.
No.
We'll get into it.
So look, obviously, this film that came out 50 years ago, many of you maybe haven't seen it, many of you don't want to see it.
Is it the 50th?
It's 1973, so we're actually at 49 years. But if you think about it, they would have filmed it in 72. So let's say 50 years for the sake of argument, right? Yeah, many people haven't seen it. Many people maybe don't want to see it, but they want to.
See, everyone knows about it.
Everyone knows about it. What's it about? Let's give you the gist.
Yeah.
So it was made in 1973, as we know, directed by William Friedkin. He'd only made a few films before this, famously French Connection, 1971. Yeah. Have you seen The French Connection?
No, I've not, but
we'll have to add that to the list. Great film, great crime thriller with Gene Hackman. Got a wonderful car chase in that. So the same year The French Connection was released, a novel came out called The Exorcist, which was written by William Peter Blatty. And it became a really big success, a bestseller in its time, which I know anecdotally from reading William Peter Blatty's obituary when he died in 2017. The reason it was able to get such a big push was that he was on like the Tonight Show promoting it, and he had a very early slot, which is the least important slot. Yeah. But Robert Shaw, who we talked about with Jaws, right, was enjoying a little bit too much green room hospitality.
Yeah, I bet.
Was enjoying the refreshments a little too much.
Jaws and
yeah. And so he didn't come on for ages. So they had to keep William Peter Blatty on talking about it, and he was a very good he was very good at talking.
And so he just got loads
He
of
got
minutes.
loads of airtime to talk about The Exorcist.
Oh, wow.
So loads of people went out and bought it, loads of people went out and read it, and it became this big thing. Then, Friedkin gets attached to direct it and make it. And Warner Brothers is the studio. I've got some facts here I want to read through to you just to contextualize the film and bring people into this world, because many people listening, like me, will not have known much about it. I must say, going in, here's what I knew about The Exorcist. I knew some of the images. Yeah. I knew some of the moments in it, but I did not know the story. I did not know how it ended. Yeah. All I knew was like the sort of cultural conversation around it.
I was surprised by how much of it I had retained. So rewatching it in a way that I didn't know the film well at all.
Yes.
But I was like, I know this scene, and I know obviously like not just the famous moments. I was like, this is all actually quite familiar. Yeah. And I was again reminded of how just completely like all-encompassing that film was in terms of its effect on pop culture. Yes. Like the number of scenes which have been taken onto all the other scary films.
This is why we wanted to watch it. It's such a massive film. It's a massive blind spot.
You forget how
Okay, so essentially the premise is that it's about a teenage girl, 12 years. Well, I think she's 12 in the film, called Reagan, and her mother in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. Reagan becomes possessed by a demon, which leads to an inevitable exorcism by the titular exorcist. Okay, so I've got some facts I'm just going to run through for you. So, like, principal photography was very difficult. Yeah. A fire destroyed a lot of the set.
It was a cursed set.
Yeah, Ellen Burstyn, who plays the mother, had injuries from an accident, and so did Linda Blair, who was...
During filming, she slipped on her coccyx or something.
Oh, God, really? Yeah. Oh, man. It was turned down by a lot of studios, a lot of stars. When it was released, it was only released in 24 theaters. Yeah. But then it became and it had a sort of mixed reviews, but it had a massive word of mouth sensation.
People were queued. It was famously a cold winter, and people queued outside for hours to go see it.
But before we get to that, this is sort of the overview, like the cultural conversation. The cultural conversation became massive, and it became the first horror film to be nominated for the Best Picture Award at the Oscars, and it won 2 for sound design and best adapted screenplay. Okay, it was the highest grossing R-rated horror film of all time, unadjusted for inflation, until it came out in 2017. Yeah. So The Exorcist is a character called Lancaster Merrin. They wanted Marlon Brando to play him, and they said no, that would make it a Marlon Brando picture. Get rid of that. Mike Nichols, who directed The Graduate, fantastic director, turned down the project because he didn't believe they could find a teenage girl, an actress who could pull off the physical demand of playing a possessed child, which we'll go into. They looked at Denise Nickerson, who was Violet Beauregard in Willy Wonka the Chocolate Factory, but her parents didn't want to do it. Jamie Lee Curtis of course, who would later be in Halloween, but Janet Leigh didn't want her to do it. And eventually, obviously, they found Linda Blair,
who did actually struggle to shake the typecasting.
Oh god, yeah. When it's such a massive film like that,
into your mind, isn't it?
There's a lot of stuff in it about her voice when she is possessed. It's like this. It's clearly a different beast of sound design. It's not Linda Blair's voice. They originally wanted to use Linda Blair's voice and deepen it and roughen it up in post-production, but William Friedkin felt it wasn't effective enough in some scenes, so they hired Oscar-winning actress Mercedes McCambridge, who is an experienced voice actress and who Orson Welles once called the world's greatest living radio actresses, right? To voice the demon inside of her, which the demon called Puzazu, but is not referred to that in the film, actually.
Is it written anywhere?
I think it must be in the novel. It must be.
The novel, right.
Okay. The editing of the title sequence was designed by a guy. It was one of his first projects, and it was so successfully went on to do Star Wars, Taxi Driver, and like Gangs of New York.
Wow.
It was a massive cultural conversation. Like you said, there was a cold winter.
Yeah.
And then it became this thing. The story became more than the film. It became about how the film was being received. And they said something like, no film's audience has ever received so much attention in the press as much as the Exorcist audience did.
And you had the whole religious tension attached
to
it.
Yeah, you had
as
this. It was saying things
banned.
about. It was throwing a lot of dirt at the Catholic Church. But it became this fever, this kind of like fever pitch where I'm sure the studios whipped it up to sell tickets to get the spectacle. There were reports of people vomiting, passing out.
There was a miscarriage.
There was rumoured to be a miscarriage. Dark stuff.
Ambulances on standby.
Yeah, ambulances on standby. People like passing out in cinemas and breaking their jaws on the seats. Like really,
when we did our thing on Jaws, we were talking about films that had such an intense audience reaction.
Yes,
it's like George with people just going in the sea and sharks. Yes, and then this with horror, anything to do with demonic possession. This just truly changed what people thought of religion, I think.
Exactly. But some journalists really found it annoying because they felt that the conversation about The Exorcist and was detracting from the Watergate scandal.
Yeah,
and it was just taking up too much news.
Yeah.
It was a rare horror film, one critic said, that became part of the national conversation. So that's the kind of gist. I'll give you the plot, like I said.
Yeah.
The film begins in a very cinematic fashion. It's like all told through images and little words. Lancaster Merrin, played by Max von Sydow, is at a dig in Iraq, and there's some sort of imposing imagery, and then we cut back to
statues of the devil.
And there's like bad omens and dogs fighting.
These old, what are they called? Like relics.
Relics.
Things long buried in the ground.
Nothing, anything said, and it's just him looking at images and feeling.
And like the clock stopping when he goes into that room. Yeah, it's very unnerving.
So, I mean, I don't think I've missed anything out. That's the sort of context for it. And like I said, from that, it became hugely influential.
It follows this woman who's a famous actress who's shooting a film locally with a film director. And it sort of implied that she has she's wealthy, sort of socializes in a sort of upper middle class company, and she has a lot of money and resources. And that's kind of part of it, is that no matter what kind of medical help she receives, ever scaling, like eventually turns into like a room of doctors trying to figure out what's wrong with her, and they realize they need to get God involved.
Exactly. Yeah. And the role of the mother is really important, and it's Ellen Burstyn, who would obviously go on to be in loads of stuff like Requiem for a Dream. She's really big in that. She's just in loads of things. But originally, at the time she wasn't known, they first went to Audrey Hepburn to play the mother.
Yes, I saw that.
She couldn't do it because she lived in Rome.
Yeah.
They tried to get Anne Bancroft, but she was pregnant. Jane Fonda didn't want to do it. Shirley MacLaine had already been in like a demon possession film, and eventually they arrived at Ellen Burstyn. And the third character we haven't actually mentioned, or fourth rather, so you've got the daughter, Reagan, the mother, Chris, the exorcist, Lancaster Merrin, and also a fourth character called Father Karras, who was played by an actor who actually had no acting experience. He was a theatre director. He is his narrative runs parallel to their story in that he's a priest having a crisis of faith. He has a mother, an elderly mother who he looks after, who I think we can say, passes away, and he feels incredible guilt, and he's in a bit of a
complex over what to do with her in her dying days. Like, should she be in a hospital? Should she be at
exactly,
home?
yeah, and he feels incredible guilt. And he's having this loss of faith at the same time when this battle between good and evil is happening. Anyway, that's The Exorcist.
That's The Exorcist.
That's the lay of the land. Let's get into it, James.
It's a big exorcism.
Oh, actually, one more thing.
Yeah,
and this I think just sums it up. People say that The Exorcist did for horror films like what Jaws did for the blockbusters and what 2001 did for sci-fi. It's a culture-defining moment for their genre. So, James, you revisited it after 10 years. What did you think?
Easily over 20.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's watching it in 2022 and thinking back to what it would have been like to see that in 73.
Yeah.
I'm just like, wow, how that was still a really shocking and difficult watch. Yeah. And given the fact that we have I don't know, all the modern like Euphoria where things just open with it, I'm like, wow, this is just quite a lot. And one of the things I noticed is that from the get-go, the tension is always up. It never ceases to have a down scene. And there are so many simple scenes that could have been shot in a really boring and filler kind of way, and it doesn't. It's constantly making you question everything of why is that person standing there and watching there. I was constantly obsessing over how many things in the background were there to unsettle you, distract you, make you feel uneasy. The number of faces that were in the background, and obviously the faces that pop up in that film. But it is just really quite chilling to its core. I can't say I was really, really shocked and scared like I would a modern horror movie might jump scare me. But it's one of those things where the imagery and the way that makes you feel and how you would feel about turning your lights off when you go to sleep at bed is sort of now sewn into me. And I feel, because I watched it this morning. I was just after it, I was like, shit, I need to lie down. But I totally get it. It is
you believe the hype.
You believe the hype. It is purely unnerving to its core.
Yeah, I agree. It's unsettling and unnerving. And what stood out for me, I was like, as you've just said, this is still shocking.
Yeah, the language used, the imagery.
Totally. I don't know if I'd use the word scary. I don't know if I felt scared, but definitely the scenes of Reagan possessed. Throughout the film, they're sort of dotted, and they obviously build until the last third act, which is the exorcism, are so shockingly violent and aggressive and explicit that I watched it with some friends and we were like, Jesus.
It's a lot.
And the way they're cut as well. The film otherwise has quite a steady pace to build up to it, which works fantastically.
And the final act is just brilliant.
Yeah. Exactly. The pace is so methodical and really getting you to build in this world, make it very eerie and still. And then when it's all in Reagan's bedroom, and there's this sort of fraught anxiety about opening the door to Reagan's bedroom. As soon as you go in there, it's quick cuts. The sound design is brilliant about furniture moving, things crashing.
You never know how she's going to react or what she's going to do.
Yeah. So that's what stood out for me, how genuinely shocking it was. And there were a couple of images in it that are not just graphic and violent, but really chilling. There's one to relate to Father Karras' mother that I was like, oh God, it's not scary. It's just eerie.
And it doesn't. It sounds like such an obvious thing for us because we're so used to the quiet bang. Here's when we're going to tell you when exactly you're scared. But the face of the devil, I assume, popping up. And the number of times faces, like I said before, faces appearing. That's the kind of thing. Even though it didn't scare you at the time, that image is now in your brain. You feel like when you close your eyes, you're looking at that exact face, and it's the core of your nightmares.
Yeah. So just to explain that to people, there's this image, like a quick frame. It's just almost subliminal. That they flash up from time, which is this sort of it's almost like in a
white makeup
face with sharp teeth.
And it's meant to be sort of like the flash of the devil.
Yeah, the flash of the
devil's
face.
There are loads of them. There's loads, so in the sort of final scene, the room is stone cold. It's like a freezer. And they actually refrigerated the room.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, they did, because they wanted to get the breath, the cold breath coming out. And there's moments when Max von Sydow's character is leaning over the bed and the breath forms the silhouette of a face.
Wow.
Because I think I saw 3 flashes of the devil. I think there was like the 2 and then 1 towards the end when her face, you can see it in
they
her face.
superimposed the devil's face over Reagan's own possessed face.
There's so much to be said about the subliminal imagery in that film, not just the flashes of things that you don't see, but the way in which they wrapped the corners of the bedpost in this like padding to probably for plot reasons to stop her hitting herself, but it's apparently meant to be like all this horrible phallic imagery on as to cast as shadows. And in the sound design, they used really subtle things when you're approaching the door or when bad things would happen. They used the sound of a flock of bees, and they use the sound of industrial drilling and a pig squealing, all subtly in there. And these are like primal triggers to tell you to like avoid, step back, do not approach. And of course, in a cinema or like watching a film, you're sat there and it's coming to you. So there's all these things about people having such a profound reaction to it, but these bastards, like in the sound design, tapped into your very primal fear of like get away, something approaching, something back. You know that horrible sound of a pig squealing?
Oh yeah,
it's like all of those sounds coming from her, and it just really hits you. And I think there's so much more going on in that film than you realize. Like I know we think of the scary movie trope of like the face paintings in the background and like the knights like the Knights of Arms turning, but that if you study loads of frames of that film, there are always faces in the corners watching, and then all of a sudden the devil flashes up and you just have a heart palpitation.
There is something to be said about the stillness. That I think there's something incredibly creepy about stillness, and modern horror films can be very chaotic and loud and like crash bang. But there is something that is the like the doctors looking at her. There's there's the sterilized stillness of the hospital and the images of the face that flash up. That is very the scene with Karras when he has that hallucination about his mother and the subway station. That it's always the small things that get you, and the sound design, I think, is almost like that's why it won for best sound, because that's where a lot of the horror is. Not only in the way that the house moves and the beds, but Reagan's vocal that really
it's like a deep male voice that comes out.
That's the key to the possession. And what's great is the sound design and how Linda Blair's performance matches that. So you never ever feel like there's a disconnect. I never ever felt too much like, oh, that's been dubbed over. Her performance matches it really well. And apparently Mercedes McCambridge, who I said did the voice of the devil, they actually strapped her to a chair because they strap Reagan to her bed to make sure she doesn't escape. And so there's a lot of writhing and like, let me go. And they apparently did strap her to a chair to really get that effect of let me out. And that's another thing to say. The voice of the devil is it's not just like fear me. It's playful. It's like a really horrible, taunting,
and then when
vulgar,
it says personal things to the priest that she would otherwise never know of, when you realize you're speaking to the devil. Really horrible things. There's wonderful stories of how Friedkin was desperate to get real, genuine looks of shock and disgust from his actors. Did you hear about this? No. So there's like scenes where people get slapped by Reagan. Like there were moments where Friedkin would actually slap people across the face.
Wow.
Like surprising them before the camera rolled, and they would just be disgusted, and then he would roll and get their reaction of them having been just slapped.
That's so 70s.
And it just would honestly never happen now. And there was, there's a moment where Max von Sydow's leaning over, and like there's all throughout the film, this green pus kind of comes out of her, and this moment where it splats him right in the eye on his glasses and on his face. He was told that would only hit him on the chest, but they changed it to hit him in the face. I think they said it was like a green pea soup, but they wanted to capture the disgust of like him actually realizing it was all over his face.
Well, we should say like how the possession manifests. So at first, Reagan like comes downstairs during a party and looks like really hungover, and says to an astronaut who's there, she says, "You're gonna die up there." And then she just urinates on the floor, right? It's a very famous scene. And then she's kind of bedbound. And then she goes to the hospital and she has and do you know that was the scene in the hospital that most people found troubling? It's not a supernatural scene. It's a type of procedure where they have to insert a thing into her neck and then the blood spurts out of her neck so they can then put the dye through so they can track where because they think there's something wrong with her brain. And apparently loads of people were very squeamish about that because of the blood just spurting out in this very narrow way. And there's something very sterile and horrible about that environment. And then she gets increasingly worse. There's something in the attic moving about, scratching. Her bed keeps moving.
And she's saying, "Mom, I couldn't sleep. My bed was shaking."
Yeah, and then she's like She's talking. When the medicine fails, they speak to her like almost like a hypnotherapist, and she sits there, but her body is like contorted, and her eyes are really sullen, and then the voice is getting deeper, and her lips are getting cracked, and then eventually she's bedbound, she's tied up, and her body is like rotting, peeling away. These cuts on her face, her eyes roll back into her head.
When they strike her with holy water, it like breaks the skin and wipes through.
And when she speaks in the devil's voice, her larynx like inflates. Like, you know,
it's still shocking to see.
Oh, totally. And then, of course, there's the green vomit that she just like spews out, almost to mock the exorcist and the priest.
Yeah.
So
which you can tell it smells, even though you know it smells. But like, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say. So what happens is after this, Reagan is clearly possessed, and obviously the mother takes her to the hospital, and it becomes clear that she does need an exorcist. So this is where Father Karras intersects, and he visits her. And there's this quite strange second act which I found quite odd, which almost didn't work, where Father Karras, she says to him, "I think we need an exorcist." And he says, "Well, let me have a look at her." By the way, the actor who plays Father Karras has like the most 70s face. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so
right?
much.
He goes to visit her, and this is when she's in like full possessed mode. And he speaks to her, and he's very calm. And like he says to the mother afterwards, "Yes, it could all be in her mind. It could be because of psychiatry." And I was like, "Did you not see her face?
Yeah.
It's like peeling off. Like she vomited like green goo. How could
she's got those like eye things in, which is just like make her eyes look really horrible.
I was like, how could you possibly
like
think that? Anyway, and there's this attack. Obviously, he puts on this personal attack. The devil keeps saying to Damien Karras, the father, saying, "Your mother's in here with us." There's all these voices that are in this
Greek
body.
And his mother was Greek.
Yeah,
and like all of this kind of stuff.
And
there's a lot worse language used.
Oh,
that we're
God,
not
we can't
saying.
even repeat it. But that's what makes it so shocking. I mean, for me, the most shocking scene was the crucifix scene. I could not believe that. That was just.
So on that, I mean, like one of the things you might think. Again, I still think we're desensitized this today, but I think in the late 60s, it would have been more horrifying to think that this was actually played by a 12-year-old and not like a 17, 18-year-old playing young. But it's just William Friedkin talking about the fact that, quote, "I thought for a long time we could never make this film. We wouldn't be able to cast it. We threw the net out for about 2,000 young girls, and we couldn't find anybody who could even handle the subject matter, obviously, because it's if you're trying to speak to a 12-year-old girl and you're like, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to stick a crucifix in your what's it? Like, that's quite a lot to explain. And then
excellently described,
from his
James.
office at 666 Fifth Avenue, which is an ironic address if there ever was one, Friedkin and Blatty had given up and started auditioning actresses who were in their late teens. Then 13-year-old Linda Blair and her mother came in without an appointment, hoping to get a shot at the part. At that point, most of Blair's experience had been modelling clothes for advertisements, so not an experienced actress at all. So she sat down with her mother and said, "Linda, do you know anything about The Exorcist?" Friedkin records. She said, "Yeah, I read the book. It's about a little girl who gets possessed by the devil and then does a whole bunch of bad things." I said, "Like what? What kind of things does she do?" He said, teasing her. She told him, "Well, she hits her mother across the face and she pushes a man out her bedroom window and she masturbates with a crucifix." This was the moment with the story that caused more angst than any other and remains a deeply controversial part of the movie, even though it's a scene that is shot from behind and like technically.
And they used a different actress, I think, for the
stand can be used. I look over and her mother is smiling. Friedkin says, "I asked, do you know what that means?" She said, "Yes, it's like jerking off, isn't it?" When the director took a deep breath and asked if she even knew what that meant, she replied, "Sure, don't you?" So she was the only one of the young girls that I felt, I'm quoting Friedkin, that I felt would not be destroyed by this experience. And he still said he tried to keep the set light and jokey during the most intense scenes to alleviate any residual weirdness for her. If she was bothered by it during production, the rest of the cast couldn't function, nor could the crew. She said in the dailies, you'd see her after every take where she's saying the most horrific things. I'd say cut, and then one of the prop men would hand her a milkshake and she'd be laughing. The whole thing to her was a game. Right. Even though that's sort of comforting to hear, you wouldn't be able to do that today.
No.
Even to sit down and talk about the content they just talked about is not an appropriate thing to do with a 12-year-old. It's insane.
I think that, that scene is really, really shocking.
Yeah.
I think that, I'm just trying to think about how it like works now, like 50 years later. I think that, was there anything that didn't work for you in it? Anything that you thought
I'd
that's
say,
dated?
if I was to really nitpick, I'd say there are one too many doctors scenes. And I
Yes.
could go, yeah, I get it. Like, the doctors can't help. I understood that pretty soon.
Yeah.
I loved the image of what's face, the mother's character, sitting in a room with 8 white coat doctors and like a guy on a chalkboard and someone studying a book, and you could just tell through that visual imagery, there's nothing, absolutely nothing what to do. But there was a lot of doctory stuff.
Like, it's called The Exorcist.
Yes.
We know it's getting
need
to.
God
I
involved.
think the film plays a lot of well with that tension of like the film knows that you know it's The Exorcist. You know
Yes.
something scary is coming.
Yeah.
But it takes a while to really build that out. For me, it was the way that the narrative was focused. In that it was a real disconnect between like action and reaction. So, for example, people would go up and then this horrible thing would happen with Reagan in her bedroom, and then they'd cut and they'd all be downstairs like having tea, going, "I think there's something wrong with your daughter." And I'm like, did no one say?
No shit.
Yeah, it's almost like Chris, the mother, it's up to her role entirely to be the emotional one who reacts.
Sure.
There's no other like, good Lord, what's happening to this child? It's just like, I think there's something wrong with the child. She's like, yes, would you help my daughter?
Yeah.
I'm like, there's something really wrong with her.
My favorite shot, or the thing that's sort of good burned into my mind, is when he lifts up the shirt and he sees scratched on her stomach from the inside, "Help me." And because like the devil had said, she was like, where is she? Like, she's with us. Like, she's inside. Like, it's just, you can tell, "Help me," scratched on the inside of the tummy. It's just traumatizing.
I think that's it. I don't think it's. If someone said to me, "Is The Exorcist scary?" I mean, if you're an adult, if you're a child, yes.
Yeah,
if you're I don't know, like an adult who's seen a fair few horror films, or even a few, I would say it's not scary in the same way I would say something that, like, I don't know, like Hereditary, or like that was even more deeply disturbing. I think that's our generation.
I think that's more disturbing. Yeah.
But it is unsettling, shocking. And if someone said, well, The Exorcist is 50 years old, should I still see it? I would say, I think it's, even though we're saying it's diluted now, 50 years later, we still get a glimpse of how powerful that would have been at the time.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I think I've told you before, my dad saw it, I think when he was like 17, and he like went home, and he's not religious, but he like held his crucifix to his chest, like, Jesus Christ.
You know, there was like the biggest rise in reported possessions after that film came out, and it was like, everyone just went hysterical for it. It's completely traumatizing still to watch. Yeah. You need a big hug.
You do need a big hug. Yeah. I'm glad I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I've been to Washington where that is filmed, and those steps really are there. They're very famous, long, narrow steps. Imagine, like, I hate to make this reference, but you know that scene in Joker where he does the dance? Remember those steps
Longer,
like
but
really
narrower.
narrow and really unsettling and imposing.
And there was nothing like seeing the shot where the exorcist rocks up out of the cab to the house, the light post, and the light coming down. Even though you know that scene and it's been done in Family Guy, and it's just, you've seen even the silhouette and the art of that like in 2D, seeing that shot and the mist and the fog, and he's just silhouetted, and you know exactly what has to happen and what's about to happen. The suspense and the tension leading up to it, and it's such a beautifully it's painted, it's art. It really does work still. It's not lost its appeal. It's kind of like seeing the binary sunset in Star Wars. It never really loses its sense of wonder.
When you first see the shark in Jaws, when it comes out of the water, just that's the iconic moment. And yes, it's on the poster. Do you know they say that it's just beautiful as a picture as well, just as a photo. Picture. They say it comes, it's got art history reference, and that I think it references a Magritte painting called like A Symphony of Light, which is about it's about the dampness of the light and the time of night, time of day it's very dusky, and just the quality of that light is very specific.
You know how much we talked about its reaction and how it like to this day it was the film that shouldn't even have been R-rated, it should have been X-rated. Like, it's not for people to see. And I think anecdotally, so many people I've spoken to who grew up then, who were far too young to see it, it was the kind of day and age where like you just rocked up to the cinema and someone would sell you a ticket, and it's really appropriate. But that reputation of it being so bad that no one should be allowed to see The Exorcist, you know, we're talking about it like it's a work of art, but imagine that being censored. There's this interesting thing about how it actually took a long time to come on to video in the UK. So The Exorcist was available on home video in 1981 in the UK. After passage of the Film Recordings Act in 1984, the film was submitted to the British Board of Film Classification for a home video certificate. And the director of the board, a guy called James Furman, vetoed the decision to grant certification of the film, despite everyone else kind of wanting for it to be shown. And it was his concern that it shouldn't even be an 18 certificate. It should be like a restricted form of art. And that it actually, like, the notoriety would entice younger viewers to seek out the film. So as a result, all video copies of The Exorcist were withdrawn in the UK in 1988, and it remained unavailable to purchase until 1999.
Wow.
Isn't that insane?
It's a different era.
You couldn't, so when we were born, you actually weren't allowed to buy The Exorcist until 99.
This is how much things have changed in terms of like our access to content.
Yeah.
Now we are just like deluged with it. I rented this. I just got on Amazon, just popped it up, right? But like the idea that, you couldn't get it for years.
Because it was just seen as too shocking. And there was the religious element of it, where it's like, this isn't just shocking, it's also like touching subject matter, which to a lot of old-fashioned people or very religious people would have been seen as, no, it's like, you shouldn't be talking about the devil in this way, you shouldn't be filming like a young girl, even for entertainment. Like, why would you be entertained by that kind of content? And like 1999, you couldn't get it in the UK.
But then it just adds to the whole mythos.
And I think
that
makes it even worse. Oh, I've got that film that's banned. Let's all watch it. We're 15, we're underage. Like, let's go see it.
But did you know in America there was a bigger controversy because it got released as an R-rated film, which is the equivalent, I guess, for like being an 18. Yeah, but it should have been. People said it should have been an X-rated film. Definitely should have been an X-rated film because of the content. But apparently, because it cost
21 or just like it's just
I think
like
X-rated.
warning.
That's like almost like pornography level.
Right.
It's like,
Okay.
But they said that because it cost so much money, I think it went over budget as well,
Yeah.
like we talked about with Jaws. Warner Brothers put a lot of pressure on the film classification board to be like, you need to release it as an R because it's open to a wider audience.
Yeah.
If you release it as an X-rated film, no one will be able to go see it. Or a very limited audience will. So it's amazing how that has changed so much.
Yeah.
But
The
what
idea of
has
censoring something because it's too shocking. Right?
Yeah. And I think what's changed is that, but what hasn't changed is that it's still scary to see a child in that kind of environment. And, like, there's lots of other, like, the Omen and stuff, but 50 years later, it is still shocking to see a child performed and presented in that way, even now. I think to sum up then, I'm glad I've watched it. You're glad you've rewatched it.
And it's worth rewatching.
It is worth seeing.
If you fancy it.
It's worth seeing once.
100%. Yeah.
It is worth seeing once. And if you're, don't be afraid to watch The Exorcist.
You can do it.
You can do it. We believe in you. So,
and I just think so many things to appreciate about what every scary film you've seen has taken inspiration from, and just the pop culture, being part of that conversation. Pop culture, it's so worth seeing it.
Let us know if you do watch it, and let us know what you think.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.